Thank you. We Global Action Plan, mobilize action on systems that harm us and our planet. And we do this by creating change through research, collective action, and campaigns. And our mission and vision are on the screen at the moment. So today's session is about indoor air quality. So why have we chosen to talk about this? Well, since COVID, there has been an increase in interest, concern, and research into indoor air quality. And over the last 6 months in particular, we've seen mounting evidence on the harms of wood burning and gas stoves. But this issue of indoor air quality, is it just that person who can't hear me? Can other people hear me? Yeah, okay,
I can hear you, Ben, yeah.
Cool. Sorry, what's happened there? Yeah, so this issue of indoor air quality is more than just how we heat our homes and cook. It's intrinsically linked to how and where we live. We spend the vast majority of our time indoors, where pollution levels are often higher than they are outside. Levels of air pollution can sometimes be up to 5 times as high as outdoor levels. And some anecdotal studies that Global Action Plan did as part of Clean Air Day 2019 found that air pollution levels inside can be 500 times higher than they are outside. And that was typically when people were frying food. And the academic evidence is now starting to support this, and we're going to hear from some of our speakers about this today. But before we start, I'd like to remind you that this session is being recorded, and if you could kindly stay on mute. We do have a Q&A function, and please use that to pose questions to our speakers. There will be some time at the end for a Q&A. There are also closed captions available, and you can enable them using the closed caption button at the bottom of your screen. And you may wish to select speaker view if you haven't already. There's a little kind of view button on the top right, which will just make the speakers visible to you more clearly. So today, as I mentioned, we're focusing on the 2 biggest sources of indoor air pollution. So in terms of heating, that would be wood burners, and in terms of cooking, that would be gas stoves. Firstly, we're going to hear from Lauren, who's going to help set out the context of indoor air pollution and how that is an inequality issue. Then Michael is going to talk to us about gas stoves, and Tessa wood burning, and then we're bringing in Agnes to talk about maternal health and challenges of indoor air pollution as well. So let's welcome our first speaker, who is a research fellow from UCL, and that's Lauren Ferguson, and she will help set out the context for today's discussion. Lauren, over to you.
Thanks, Ben. Hi, everyone. I hope you can hear me okay. I'm doing this stood up in a corridor, so please bear with me. But yeah, I'm Lauren, and I'm a research fellow at UCL. And so I work with the UK Health Security Agency and the Department of Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, and look at how indoor air pollution, and more recently like indoor temperatures, are like not equally distributed across different population subgroups. Yeah, so today I'm going to talk about some work that I did for my PhD, which was looking at indoor air pollution exposure inequalities in Greater London. Outdoor air pollution is quite widely recognised as being unequally distributed across different subgroups of the population. But in the UK and in kind of higher income countries more generally, we spend about 90% of our time indoors. And this is especially true for sort of more vulnerable subgroups. So, okay, so I'll go. So, yeah, so this graph shows the distribution of asthma, coronary heart disease, and COPD across different levels of area deprivation in London. And the pink distribution is the most deprived neighbourhoods, and blue is least deprived. And basically what I was trying to say is that these diseases are generally higher in more deprived areas. And next slide, please, if possible. yeah, so the built environment is a key site through which structural inequality translates to health inequality. And so where we live and work and go to school and spend our time can shape our health significantly. And so the previous slide showed that air pollution showed that cardiovascular diseases are generally higher in more deprived areas, and these are some of the key disorders that are associated from prolonged exposure with air pollution to air pollution. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is from the NatSen Time Use Survey, and it just shows how the population, like in which environments they spend their time. And you can see that overwhelmingly they spend it in indoor environments, particularly the home, and on weekdays in other indoor environments, so like school, work. So that indoor exposure will be a bigger contributor to our overall exposure. Next slide, please. And so what I did for my PhD is try and like understand the drivers of unequal indoor exposures, particularly in Greater London. So these are outdoor concentrations being higher in more deprived areas of London. So you get higher levels of infiltration. So when you ventilate, because dwellings are primarily naturally ventilated in England. And so these two graphs show how outdoor concentrations vary by area deprivation, and it shows that they're generally higher in more deprived areas, but it also suggests that there is limited spatial variation of particulate matter outdoors in London because it's just generally quite polluted everywhere. Next slide, please. So this is data from the English Housing Survey, which is a nationally representative housing database. And so we look at how lower income homes, what kind of dwellings lower income people live in, what are the ventilation characteristics. And generally, like, we find that they're more likely to live in smaller dwellings, more likely to be a flat, such as a flat. And these flats have like a fewer external facades through which to exchange outdoor air. And the smaller dwellings will have implications for the distribution of indoor sourced air pollution. So like if I'm smoking a cigarette inside, which we'd never do, the concentration of air pollution will build up higher in a smaller internal volume than if I was smoking the same cigarette in like a sports hall or something. And we also find that so they're more likely to live in homes with a less secure tenure. And that has implications for other things, which I'll talk about in a minute. Next slide, please. Oh yeah, so this is just internal volumes, which I just talked about with the cigarette. The same source emitting at a constant rate will build up, air pollution will build up more in a smaller indoor space. Next slide. So yeah, I said about like having a less secure tenure. So we tend to find that repairs, so for things like kitchen extract ventilation, which is crucial to reducing indoor concentrations from cooking, so it's more likely to remain broken in lower income homes. And this can be difficulty when you rent your home from a social or private landlord. And there's other factors like how often you can open windows. Ventilation is a key way to reduce indoor concentration. And in London, we find that a lot of respondents might not want to ventilate their house at night due to security risks or issues with outdoor air pollution. Next slide. So for my PhD, I tried to incorporate all these different building and environmental factors into like a model that can, and I focused on kids in London for my PhD and looked at how these different factors contribute to childhood indoor exposure. And like we found that, as you would expect, children from lower income homes always basically had worse exposure than those from the highest income homes. and also found that given how much time they spent indoors, targeting indoor environments for air pollution, so improving kitchen ventilation, cooking with clean fuels was key to reducing indoor exposures. Yeah, next slide, please. So to summarize, low-income individuals are exposed to disproportionate levels of indoor air pollution in London. And this is driven by living in areas with greater outdoor concentrations of air pollution, smaller dwellings with lower levels of background ventilation, and sort of additional ventilation such as extract fans is more likely to remain broken. And this can lead to health impacts and contribute to the growing health inequalities gap in London and England more widely. And one thing, like an additional point that I wanted to mention is it's not just cardiorespiratory effects. There's like a growing link between air pollution and mental health issues. And there's a fairly recent study there that found a link in South London. So these findings suggest that if you actually target air pollution concentrations, both indoors and outdoors, you can target health inequalities by like a number of inroads. I think that's next slide. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's it. If anyone's got any further questions, feel free to email me.
Or use Q&A.
Or use the Q&A.
Yeah. But of course, if anything that we don't have time for. Thank you, Lauren. That was great. Next up, we have Mike Scholand, the senior advisor for CLASP, to give us a deep dive into gas cooking. Michael, over to you.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you, Lauren. That was a wonderful introduction to some of the things I'll be touching on in this talk. I'm going to be highlighting the hidden health impacts of cooking with a gas stove in a UK home. So some of the research that we've been doing on this. And just to say briefly for context, so you're aware, so CLASP is an international nonprofit, non-governmental organization whose mission is to accelerate the transition to a more sustainable world by improving the energy and environmental performance of appliances and equipment. So our work on gas stoves is precisely in line with our organizational mission, so to speak. So I'm going to talk now about a project which is ongoing as we speak. We are just wrapping up the first phase and are starting the second phase. And the main goal of this overall program is to gather evidence on the health and environmental impacts of gas stoves. This is to inform the policy processes. As some of you will be aware, the UK government, it's called now the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero, are conducting a review of all domestic cooking appliances. And obviously included in that is the subset of gas cooking appliances. And we are trying to bring the health information and evidence into that policymaking process, which will accelerate the transition to electric cooking. This is also happening in parallel in Brussels. So the EU27 are looking at exactly the same product. So very interesting. Both London and Brussels are considering this product at this time. So the third main goal of our project is to raise awareness, and that's what this webinar is about, so on, to get the information out there and to get people taking actionable movement towards moving away from gas and towards electric. So I'll be speaking today about phase one. We have a UK report that will be launched next month that's still being finalized now with some of the research and so on. But I'll be speaking mainly today about the EU findings. So this report is available on our website, and essentially it includes a review of literature of health and indoor air quality. We did a simulation of indoor air quality, so it's very interesting what Lauren was saying about the smaller kitchens, and I actually have a slide on that for the UK. We conducted measurements in a laboratory, mixing gas with hydrogen to see if hydrogen is in fact a good alternative for cleaner fuel, and how does that affect pollution and indoor air quality. We reviewed policies in the UK and the EU, and we also are looking at the test methods used for measuring the performance. The second phase, which is ongoing right now, we are measuring actual air quality in homes, over 250 homes across Europe, and there will be 40 homes here in the UK. 32 of those houses will be cooking with gas, and 8 of them will be electric, so we'll have a case and control. And we're measuring nitrogen dioxide, carbon monoxide, PM particulate matter 2.5, and carbon dioxide as well, in 40 homes later this year. And those reports will be available. The report on all 7 countries on the 250 plus households will be available after the summer break. And just to say, just a final point, that we have a peer review panel of experts who are helping us stay focused and on the right research topics and so on. Okay, so starting out, how does the UK fit with households burning gas in their kitchens? In fact, the UK is definitely on the high side. You can see 53.9% of UK households cook with gas. So that means 36 million people in our country are cooking with gas and are exposing themselves on a regular basis to problems in indoor air quality. Next slide. And this is the results of the simulation study. So what we did was look at the release of nitrogen dioxide using a software tool called COMAS. This is a tool that was developed by Lawrence Berkeley National Lab and the International Energy Agency. And we have a table here. These are the results for the UK. If you go to the report, you can see the results for 3 other simulated kitchens in the EU. And essentially, we have a series of questions. So just going down the column, in what cases did the simulation predict that the kitchen would exceed the WHO's annual limit of 10 micrograms per cubic meter of NO2? And what limit, the daily limit of 25, does the kitchen exceed or not exceed? And then the UK has limits as well, regulatory limits at 40 and 200. These are a little bit older than the WHO guidelines, which came out in 2021. So the UK regulation actually needs to be updated. But even so, you'll see on the base case of cooking with gas, the prediction is that yes, in all of these cases, the levels will be exceeded. The model is predicting that the kitchens will be at risk and exceeding the recommended levels. Then another thing, if you look at the second column, improved air tightness, this is something to bear in mind, particularly during this cost of living crisis that we're going through, that there are programs and incentives to make your house more thermally efficient, to seal the windows and stop air leaks. The trouble is, when that happens, you then reduce the air changes in the living space. And if you're cooking with gas, then that means the pollution will be with you longer, will reach higher levels of concentration, and the exposure worsens. And so you see the model is predicting a slight increase in the number of cases of exceeding the hourly limit of 200 micrograms per cubic meter when under the improved air tightness scenario. If your cooker hood is working, and I thought that was fascinating what Lauren was saying about broken cooker hoods, but if your cooker hood is working and you use it, the model is predicting that you will achieve compliance with the UK levels, but still fall afoul of the WHO's new guidelines. And finally, the last column there is looking at electric cooking as a solution where you simply remove this source of pollution from your kitchen entirely. And the violation there is actually a function of the outside air being in violation of 10 micrograms per cubic meter. And so even with air changes and the cleanest cooking source, unfortunately, that is also a violation. So you need to address outside air. Next slide, please. Now, this is a slide that's looking at the burden of childhood asthma associated with this indoor air pollution. And as many of you are aware, children are particularly vulnerable to indoor air pollution because of their size, their breathing rates, the level of activity. And researchers found that children living in a home with gas cooking have a 42% increased risk of current asthma. And based on that research, if you apply that to households in the EU 27, approximately 700,000 children have suffered asthma symptoms in the last year due to the gas stove in their homes. So it's an enormous health burden that is being carried by society to have gas cookers in their kitchens. The UK households, as Lauren was mentioning, the kitchens tend to be a bit smaller. Under those conditions, the concentrations, as I said, are higher and have longer duration. And so the UK situation we expect to be a little bit worse than the EU in terms of exposure. And I also note here that asthma continues to be among the top 10 causes for emergency room admissions for children and young people in the UK. So that's a frightening statistic. Next slide. Oops. Here we go. So just talking briefly about the health impacts on pollutants, and yeah, it isn't just about the circulatory and respiratory systems, but those are very important. I know mental health matters as well, for sure. Unfortunately, this slide is just on the circulatory and respiratory. But yeah, so highlighting here for children, impacts that have been observed in the nervous system, affecting them, the respiratory system, they're all listed here, and I won't go into them, but you'll all be receiving a copy of these slides, and so you can see these, and there are research papers and references behind these, all of these health causes and impacts associated with them in the literature. Next slide, please. And other things to consider in the context of gas cooking, that good ventilation can help, as the simulation showed. If it's working, also opening windows as well. Our research showed that when you mix hydrogen with gas and burn it in the kitchen, like one of the options that policymakers are considering is a 20% hydrogen, 80% gas mix, it does not reduce the indoor air pollution. In fact, for nitrogen dioxide, on average, it got worse. And the reason is the pollution is coming from the burning of the flame. It's the open flame in your kitchen. Primarily for the nitrogen dioxide, the nitrogen is being oxidized from the temperature. So still having a burning flame means you're still producing that pollution and still exposing your families. So hydrogen has been marketed by the fossil fuel industry in particular as a clean fuel, as a fuel that we should be transitioning to, when in fact it does not address the health issues. So we really want that message to come across clearly from this research. All gas cookers, oh, sorry. Yeah, sorry, I'm probably running out of time. Let's jump ahead to the solutions. So on the UK side, our concern here is that UK policy at this point does not protect people from these health risks associated with gas cooking. So we call on the UK government to adopt legislation to protect homes by setting pollution limits on cooking appliances that are installed. So a cap on the allowable pollution levels in the homes would be fantastic, and it would tighten down the ability of gas stoves to be installed. It would ideally remove them, frankly. We need to communicate, the government should be communicating with the public about the hazards. That can be on an energy label or through other means of communication about this exposure. And they can also incentivize the transition to electric cooking through any number of the programs. The Green Homes Grant doesn't exist anymore, but the Eco Plus scheme, the boiler upgrade scheme, there are schemes to incentivize and improve homes, and they should also be looking at the cooking fuels used in those programs to facilitate the transition away from the dirty cooking techniques. Health professionals can also raise awareness and establish the link with their patients and with the public about gas cooking and health, and support actions to mitigate them. And all of us as individuals, we can make the switch over to electric, and certainly in the meantime, ventilate as much as possible, and using the hood, and cook on the back burners. That was another piece of advice that we were given, just so that the hood can be more effective in capturing the emissions from the stove. And of course, using the correct size pan so that you capture more of the heat and have less inefficiency in the cooking. Next slide. Is that my last one? What's coming next? Yeah, so I've already discussed this, that we have a phase 2 field study underway. We're going to be measuring pollutants, and I've told you the pollutants we're going to be studying, and in the UK it will be 40 homes, and those results will be available after the summer, and there'll be a big communications campaign around this, so you'll be hearing about it from Ben and the team at the Global Action Plan. And yeah, very happy. And also, if you would like to participate in the policy process and the review of domestic cooking appliances that's ongoing with the UK government, please get in touch with ourselves or with Ben and the team at GAP. We'd love to share with you more details on this research and enable you to participate in that process and make sure your voice is heard by your government in this review. Thank you.
Excellent, thanks, Mike. Sorry, just having a bit of a coughing fit. It's not gas stove related, but water going down the wrong pipe. Yeah, so thanks, Mike. Lots of questions in the chat. You might want to pick up some of the smaller ones in the text there. We can come back to some of the bigger ones in discussion later. Now we're going to move to Tessa, who is Global Action Plan's campaigns lead for Clean Air. There's been quite a few questions about Clean Air Day as well, Tessa, so you might want to cover those.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. Just to quickly mention Clean Air Day, we will be sending out the official theme soon. It's not indoor air pollution, but we will have advice about indoor air pollution included in that. So if you're not signed up to the newsletter, please do get in touch, and we'd be happy to sign you up so you can be the first to hear when the official theme is announced. So I'm talking about wood burning today. So another type of bad indoor air pollution. And next slide, please. So as everyone in the UK and across the world knows, we've been struggling this winter with increased heating bills, and connected to that has been people looking for alternative ways to heat their home. However, there is a dangerous misconception that wood burners are an eco-friendly way to heat your home. And this winter, that's really starting to be debunked with the public. So what we do know in terms of the data is that wood burning harms people. So even homes with eco wood burners are 3 times more polluted than those without. And the problem is that even with these eco wood burning stoves that, you know, have better kind of containment of the smoke, that is still PM 2.5, which are tiny little particles we can't see, are still being breathed in through our lungs, entering our bloodstream, and are, you know, affecting every organ of the body, leading to very serious health conditions. We also know it's harming the planet, so this misconception that it's eco-friendly is not true. Burning wood releases more carbon dioxide than oil or gas for the same amount of heat or energy. And this is something that, you know, people in the environmental sector like John Monbiot have recently come out and kind of admitted that they're, you know, the original kind of selling of these appliances are not really what they seem. And what we know is that it's a really big problem in terms of air pollution, but actually it's created by a really small group of people. So only 8% of households in the UK, and these are mostly wealthier households, so they're more likely to be from AB social groups, have a wood burning stove, and they release more small particulate matter, PM 2.5, which we know is the most dangerous one, than all of the vehicles on the road combined. So huge problem done by a really, really small proportion of people. And we also know, kind of in research that's done by a research agency called Kantar Public, that most people aren't burning out of necessity. So they're burning for aesthetic and kind of lifestyle reasons, which, you know, has been sold through many years of marketing, of that it's this cozy, you know, lovely thing to add to your home. But we know that only 8% of people are using it as their main source of heat for kind of necessity reasons. And we also know this is a social justice issue. So the majority of people, as I've just said, who are burning don't need to be burning, that they have other ways that they could be heating their home. But especially in urban areas where there's, you know, areas of high deprivation right next to more affluent areas, those people who are breathing in the polluted air by wood burners of their neighbors aren't in control of their neighbors burning, but they're the ones being impacted by it as well. So it's something that, you know, impacts people who aren't even making the choice to burn wood in their home as well. And I think when thinking about it in London in particular, this is a problem across the whole of the UK, but it has been getting some real kind of increase of media attention this winter. And that's because, you know, with the cost of living crisis, it being perceived as a cheaper alternative, and also that people are using it more, and sales have increased by 60% of wood burners compared to last year. But what this is leaning to is some really serious health implications. So in January this year, there was arsenic found in London air, which is obviously something we don't want to be breathing in. And that's mostly connected to people collecting wood that they find on kind of construction sites, or maybe in their neighborhood in the local skip, thinking, oh, this is a, you know, free source of wood for my wood burner. But what a lot of people don't understand is that that wood is treated with really dangerous chemicals like arsenic that we shouldn't be breathing. We also saw Imperial College London did a piece of research that London air pollution was seen to be the worst it's been this January over the last 6 years, and it found that 60 to 70% of this particle pollution came from wood burning. So a really big problem in London in particular as well. Next slide, please. So what we at GAP have done this year in partnership with, funded by Impact on Urban Health and with a few different creative agencies, is launched a wood burning campaign. It ran from mid-January to mid-February, and it was all about increasing the knowledge of the harms of wood burning air pollution and really creating that link, because our preliminary research showed that people just don't truly understand the health harms and the planetary harms of wood burning. So it wasn't a behavior change campaign. We recommend that, you know, coming up in the next few phases, but it was really that kind of first stage of making the link. The call to action was to drive people to the Clean Air Hub, where we had a bespoke page around the facts around wood burning. Our target audience was Londoners, and specifically those who were likely to own wood burners or were thinking about buying them, so likely to be wealthier, higher socioeconomic groups. We went out on 2 different paid for advertising channels, one on Nextdoor, which is a new platform, not new to the world, but new to the UK, which is basically a place where people can kind of share information with their local neighborhood, wide-ranging things. And the reason why we really put our ads there is because it had a similar demographic to who we wanted to reach. So 73% were likely to be homeowners, 46% were likely to have a median household income of above 100K. And we also did Google Ads, which was quite a clever way of trying to get in front of people who might be looking to buy a wood burner, and having our facts about wood burning harms come up in that same kind of Google results page. Next slide, please. And so, as I mentioned, all of the ads, although they had these kind of different creative routes that were just on the previous screen, pointed people to visiting the bespoke page on our Clean Air Hub. And this is where we translated the evidence base that, you know, people like the Stove Industry Alliance don't talk about the kind of harmful facts about wood burning. So we wanted to really make sure that people saw this as a really credible, trustworthy place where the facts were kind of translated into consumer-friendly language and talked a little bit about like the problem of wood burning more generally. And so what we found off the back of this month-long campaign is 27,000 visits to the page, and we did a little pop-up survey to understand what action people took and if they found it useful. And it had a score of 3.52 out of 5 for usefulness, so people were finding the information useful, which was a good sign. And then in terms of behavior change, 33% of respondents to this pop-up survey said that they plan to burn less or to stop burning as a result of our webpage, which was good, but I think it was also interesting to see that the majority of people who said they would do neither, so that remaining percentage, didn't have a wood burner. So it might have been that they didn't feel like they could take any action because they already weren't on the wood burner. And I just put the link down there at the bottom if you are curious about the site yourself. Next slide, please. And I just wanted to share, because Nextdoor advertisements are new to the UK and new for us as GAP, we saw interesting learnings around increasing conversations around wood burning. So our ads weren't able to be commented on themselves, but what Nextdoor was able, as a platform, was able to tell us was that those exposed to the campaign versus those who weren't, there was a big difference in how many people were mentioning wood burning. So just kind of evidence to show that by seeing the ad, it ignited a conversation. And we don't have a read on kind of how many were anti-wood burner or you know, complaining about the wood burning messaging, but there were a few really interesting points pulled out by Nextdoor, and just the fact that the conversation's happening at all, we take as a really positive sign, because it's something that we feel like hasn't been talked about and should be talked about more. Next slide, please. So then finally thinking about what we think needs to happen next. So eventually what we'd like to see is a ban on wood burning, especially in urban areas where, you know, we saw the majority of people don't need it. They're using it for lifestyle and aesthetic reasons. And there was a recent Guardian article that came out that said that the majority of Londoners support a ban. Although when we were kind of looking into the question wording, it actually talked about the harm in the question, which I think is a little bit misleading, because what our research shows is that not enough people, the majority of people, don't make the connection between wood burning and the health impacts that it can have. So we think that we need to continue doing these types of public engagement campaigns, different kind of strategies to engage the public on these harms, in order to bring people along with us towards a ban. And as part of this, we're working with Impacts on Urban Health and Kantar Public to take all of the learnings that we found from this campaign, but also some other creative development research that's been done, and we're putting it into a toolkit. So for any organization that wants to do public engagement work next winter or in the lead up to next winter, please get in touch, because we can talk you through the research and insights. And that's it. Thank you very much.
Nice one. Thank you, Tessa. Then moving on, we have Agnes Agapong from the Global Black Maternal Health Institute, of which she is the CEO and founder of. So Agnes, over to you, please.
Great, thank you. You've kind of done my little introduction there, so I'll go to next slide. Next slide again. So I'm Agnes. As Ben rightly said, I'm the founder of Global Black Maternal Health. We founded Global Black Maternal Health in 2021 for the purpose of creating a Black-led global body whose key focus is to research, inform, amplify, and create solidarity with Black maternal health movements around the world. We're headquartered in London, but we have operations in East and West Africa and plans to expand. And we're really about helping to change the narrative of Black maternal health. And I'll go on to the next slide to just give a bit of context about why this is so important and then how it links into air pollution. So in the UK, Black women are, well, it changes. So right now we're looking at nearly 4 times more likely to die in pregnancy than white women. The stats are literally identical in America, where in some states we're looking at 7 times more likely. In Australia, the Aboriginal and Central Islanders are around 3 times more likely. And in sub-Saharan Africa, that's where we see the highest maternal mortality rate in the world, with nearly 70% of all maternal deaths coming from sub-Saharan Africa. Now, one of the challenges here is a lot of the research that is done around the why of this is done to the community, as in, you know, there's a lack of Black lead researchers who are leading the charge, and organizations that are led by the community to be able to understand why, which actually causes or compounds harm within these areas. So for us, and so that's for a number of reasons. There's so many nuances around data, you know, data in its sense, yes, you have to read and kind of digest what that data is actually saying, but there's nuances around why certain things would happen. And that's why it's so important to have people from the community also analysing that data. So for us, we adopt the philosophy, nothing about us without us. And we're about restructuring maternal health research by placing agency and engagement firmly back into the hands of Black communities as leaders and as change agents. Next slide. So this brings us on to one of our flagship projects, which is also funded by Impact on Urban Health, which is an air pollution in pregnancy. So the actual name of the report, which will be coming out in June on Clean Air Days, Black Child Clean Air. But for the purpose of today, it's about air pollution in pregnancy. And for this, a number of different reasons why. So when we look at those stats about Black women being more likely to die in pregnancy, there's a number of different reasons. We're not just talking about Black women being pregnant, going into labour and then dying. We're looking at also postnatally, also during pregnancy. We've touched on mental health within this presentation. So one of the leading causes of death around maternal health in general is suicide, and mental health plays obviously a key role in that. So whilst we know that air pollution is considered one of the kind of greatest environmental threats to health, we know that disproportionately in London, Black communities are impacted. So in London, Black communities are 3 times more likely to be disproportionately impacted by the effects of air pollution. We also know, and I always find this quite startling, that 76 deaths a year in Southwark, which is the Peckham and Old Kent Road and so forth, are attributed towards air pollution in general. However, Black communities within the environmental justice movement in the UK are largely missing from that conversation and from that landscape. So for the air pollution in pregnancy work was really about actually asking the community, finding out kind of a baseline of where people are at with that. Next slide. So the aim of our study was to kind of explore the awareness, the attitudes and the behaviours of Black mothers living in London towards air pollution and air pollution during pregnancy. And that was both indoor and outdoor. And to achieve this, there were 4 key objectives which were developed. So the objectives were to assess Black mothers' awareness of air pollution and air pollution in pregnancy, to explore Black mothers' attitudes towards air pollution and air pollution in pregnancy, to identify whether Black mothers' awareness and attitudes of air pollution and air pollution in pregnancy shape their behaviour and lifestyle choices. So when we're talking about even the gas stoves and so forth, kind of having an overall understanding. And then to provide government, charities and citizens with evidence to support wider projects that will improve policy and facilitate the innovation and implementation of solutions to improve the health of at-risk communities. And I'd also like to add, because I was speaking to Ben and Tessa, I believe it was just last week, when we're looking at air pollution and air quality, it's also really important to understand that for a lot of communities, this conversation is even a privilege and it's a luxury. I myself am born and raised in South London, born in Lewisham Hospital, so you can't get more local than me. And the idea that there's something called clean air and dirty air is a luxury if you don't know what clean air is. If this is the only air that you've ever breathed, how do you know that there is something called clean air? And I think a lot of the times, when we're looking at the environmental justice movement and we're looking at kind of interventions, because that lens is not in there, a lot of the recommendations that come out don't really land with some of the communities that actually need this, need the interventions the most. Equally, when we're looking at air quality, and let's say for the sake of this presentation, indoor air pollution, there's so many other factors. So if we're looking at London, for example, and I believe our first presenter was talking about, people living in flats and social housing and so forth. If you're living in those kind of environments and you're dealing with damp and you're dealing with mold and you're dealing with all these other factors that are impacting your health, you won't really extrapolate between gas and mold and damp, you're fighting with the council, maybe your social housing provider, or just your landlord. So there's all these other different factors, again, when we're looking at how do we, first of all, we identify what the issues are, and we've got lots of scientists who are doing amazing work, but also how do we ensure that we're co-producing this work with communities, and then when we're coming up with recommendations, they actually look like how the community would want to receive information. There's a few other kind of key points, when we're looking at, let me just go down here. So we spoke to, which I want to add before we go into the next slide, we gathered information from over 220 women who identified as Black or of mixed Black heritage, who were living in London and who were currently pregnant or pregnant within the last 5 years. And the majority of those, and I won't say too much about our findings because our last slide will talk about the Black Child Clean Air Conference, which will be happening in June, and how everyone can get involved. But I thought it was really important that I shared that the majority of our respondents, who are either Black or Black heritage, pointed to transport as being a major air pollutant and reported being concerned by the indoor air pollutants, damp and mold, smoke and vapor, and chemicals in cleaning products. So that's what they're saying. Women were less concerned about cooking appliances, despite gas appliances being a significant indoor air pollutant. So again, it talks about, the kind of the knowledge and the information. If you don't know, you won't know. So again, I just want to kind of touch upon that point about clean air, being that privilege. And, how do we ensure that people have that comparative? And how do we ensure, if we're looking at this information from an inequalities lens, how do we ensure that those that are actually disproportionately impacted the most, that the recommendations and the comms actually is reaching the community in the way that they need it to? Also, and if we go to the next slide. Again, I just wanted to also put about housing conditions. So I know that somebody, I've forgotten, I think it was the first presenter or the second, was talking about kind of the housing and ventilation and so forth. These are some of the kind of open text box comments that we received in our study. So my house has mold, condensation and damp. It also has horrible smells coming from the drain system of the estate I live in. It's a very busy, popular area with loads of vehicles. So again, this is kind of what the community is saying. Another one was, we have had a lot of mold in our home and that worried me. And we had so many different kind of comments around kind of mold and damp and asthma and a whole heap of other findings as well. Next slide. So we will be presenting all of our findings at the first annual Black Child Clean Air Conference, which will be held on Clean Air Day on Thursday, the 15th of June at the Royal College of Obstetricians and Gynecology. So I would hope that everybody here would also sign up and would be able to go over in depth our findings, also the themes that came out of this report. We'll be making sure that we have a kind of, it's a mix between people from community. So a lot of Black community leaders will be in attendance, in addition to charity and policy makers. But in conclusion, I want to say that Black mothers living in London, they recognise that they need to better understand how air pollution can impact the health of their unborn children and children once born. That was a massive theme that kind of came out, even though they knew they didn't have the information at hand. They knew that, of course, it's their children, it's our bodies, our babies. We want better outcomes for our community. Nobody wants that more than us, but we just don't have the information. It is clear also that better knowledge about the sources of indoor air pollution is needed. So there is evidence that this education will be welcomed, as these mothers want to be able to make informed decisions about their lifestyle choices. So yeah, I think that's it. I've taken up probably a little bit more time, but yeah, definitely you can find out more information about our work on our website, and that's www.globalblackmaternalhealth.org.uk. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Agnes. Yeah, I think it was just last week we met and decided after our chat we have to have you here today and share this with the audience. And thank you so much for doing that. Thank you to all of our other speakers. If we can bring them back on screen, I think we have about 5 minutes for Q&A. And there are a lot of questions. I see Mike has been really busy answering stuff in the chat, so thanks, Mike. And I know there's other questions that we probably won't get to, but what we can do is perhaps share around in the follow-up to this some of the key questions that were asked and some answers that we can kind of put to you. I think really the best place to start the questioning is to pick up exactly where Agnes left off. So like looking at this through the inequality lens, how do we ensure that people that are most impacted get the help they need? So starting all the way back from Lauren's research and going right through. So I don't know, Lauren, could I maybe start with you?
Yeah, sure. I thought I was really interested in Agnes, and I've seen that you've worked with Impact for Urban Health, did you say? Yeah, I think so. I've spoke to them before, so I'll be first to admit that the work that we do at UCL is primarily modelling, and there's a big disconnect with how it actually reaches the people that we're trying to highlight. But I think that in my own work, a big part of it is expanding beyond academia, because a lot of academia is just writing and publishing research papers. But I think to actually get out there and make a change, you actually have to get with an organisation that actually works in the community. And I don't think we're great at doing that at the minute, but it is changing. There's a big focus at the minute at UCL on doing like community participation approaches. But my point is that this is kind of a new thing and that it's not always been the case. And I think that's hampered how much we can impact people's lives in the past.
Cool, thanks, Lauren. I mean, it was one of the reasons I asked you to come today after kind of reading your PhD. I thought, yeah, we need to get this out to the masses as best we can. Thank you. Mike.
I actually will yield my remaining time, Ben. I've been typing a lot in the chats, responding to questions. So yeah, thank you though. I really enjoyed being with you all today, and really glad to see the interest in the topic. There's a lot of good questions from the audience. Thank you.
Thanks. And as Michael mentioned, Global Action Plan and CLASP are working together on this topic of gas stoves. And we are going to be setting up a kind of coalition and some work on that later this year. So we'd hopefully be in touch with lots of people on this call. So Tessa, I'll just move to you really on this inequalities question.
Yeah, I mean, I think as I mentioned, wood burning is something that is a social justice issue, and it's something that we really need to make sure people are understanding that what they do in their own home is affecting their communities, and that people that live next door to them don't get to decide whether or not they're breathing in the really harmful air pollution that their wood burning stoves are emitting. So I think it's a hard message to get across, because you really don't want to lead with shame. You know, shame doesn't change behavior. Shame doesn't get anyone to do anything other than get defensive. But I think the way we've talked about it is really trying to be very specific with these types of campaigns and targeting the people who are actually burning, who are likely to be wealthier communities, and empowering them with that knowledge of the harms they're creating, not just for themselves and their own family, but for communities that they live in. So needing to kind of land that message without shame, but in a way that's really going to make them understand that it's not just them that their choices are affecting.
Cool. Thank you, Tessa. Agnes, do you want to reflect on anything else that's been said?
Yep, I think I really like, Lauren, what you were just saying about academia. And I think there's so much amazing work. I'm speaking to so many different kind of professors and policymakers and so forth. But there's that missing gap between, I don't want to say co-production, but also iterating the messages. So it's like there's always amazing work happening in silo. And I suppose that's what we're hoping to do by actually having this annual conference, and not just making it a one-off with the findings of a report, but also a melting hub where researchers, policymakers, people from the charity sector and so forth, environmental justice movement can come in, and then also have people from the community. So, you know, all of the work that we've been doing, we make sure that we have our expert panels, our community leaders. We work with all the different kind of Black mum groups within the community to amplify our messages. And I suppose it's the main thing of just, I suppose my kind of, I don't know if I'm doing this as a little bit of a cheesy plea, but come along to the conference and meet. It's a free conference, and kind of speak with the community, speak directly with the people that are impacted. And then also see how then from those conversations, you can have some of those people feeding into some of the work, the research work that's being done. I always like to use this example that sometimes we're doing really good research, but if you don't have people from the community actually sense checking if those questions are even the right questions to ask, you can miss a mark. And there was this, I'll take up just one second of the time, but there was a story of, or an example of a lady who was working in a mental health institution, and she was the only Black psychologist, clinical psychologist. And one of her colleagues came to her and said, look, we think we need to escalate the issue with one of the patients because she keeps banging her head. And the Black psychologist, she was the only one, and it was a Black patient, kept on asking, but why would you need to escalate? Because I can't remember the exact clinical part, but literally she would need to have like medication and injections, and it was a real big escalation. And she said, she keeps banging her head and I don't know what's going on. So the Black lady asked a few questions, and then in the end asked, well, does she wear a weave? Does she wear a wig? Does she wear a weave? And the lady, the white psychologist, innocently was very perplexed, was like, well, why would you ask such a question? And she was like, well, you do know when Black women wear weaves, that's how they itch their head because they don't want it to move. And she was so embarrassed, but she never asked the question, and she wouldn't have had that lens to even know. So she was about to escalate. Imagine this poor woman itching her head by patting it. The next minute, you've got about 10 doctors coming in to grab her out. And she's like, what's going on? And how horrified she would have been. But it could have gone very dangerous, all because this woman isn't from the community. She wouldn't have known to ask those questions. And so that's why I'm always imploring and just using that as an example to say it's so important that even within research, that if you're trying to reach people from marginalized communities or communities that you don't engage with, whether that's, I saw someone put in the group disability, or for the sake of the work we do, the Black community, having people actually sense check the questions and give an opinion, not to take away from the research, but even just to say, well, have you thought about this? Even us within the work that we've done, I'm a Black woman, but I don't speak for the whole Black community. So I had to make sure that all the questions that we had, I had other community groups within the Black community sense checking. And sometimes they would say, well, actually, why are you using that word? And I'd be like, oh, well, you know, that's an important word. And they'll say, no, it's not. And we would have that conversation and then actually would make sense of it. So I just think it's really, really important to make sure that all this research, all this amazing work that's going on, we're not missing the mark just because we haven't asked the community what they think about the research in the first place.
Cool. Thank you, Agnes. And thank you, Tessa, Mike, and Lauren for speaking today. I'd also like to thank the funders, Trust for London, who allowed me to put on this event and an event that we did last night as well. The recording and the slides will be available to you afterwards. We'll send around an email. And I also realized that there's so many unanswered questions, which didn't have the time to get through them. And we'll do our best to answer those and send that around in the email as well. Yeah, so that's everything I want to tell you. Thank you so much for joining and spending your morning with us. I hope you enjoyed it, and we hope to see you again soon. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.
And thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Really good.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.